Good morning. Welcome to this morning's webinar on fall protection and fall arrest. My name is Ryan Bast of the Motor Safety Association, putting on this webinar in partnership with CWEDA, the Canada West Equipment Dealers Association. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the staff at CWEDA for partnering with our association to offer quarterly safety webinars to the membership of CWEDA. Speaking to a lot of dealerships within the industry, we realize there's always a barrier in having technicians off the job due to a workplace injury, and we can't afford to have technicians off the job for any sort of an injury, and therefore we see such importance of offering these webinars and keeping our staff safe and at work. You may have noticed for the webinar, I have muted all of the participants. So we do have the opportunity, there is a question box, and people have the opportunity to enter their questions in the question box for us to answer, and we will answer those at the end of the webinar, the questions that come up, and we'll also unmute the microphones at the end of the webinar so people can have a chance to participate. Just in the past, we've had some background noise and feedback come through the microphones, so therefore we're just used to go this direction, which seems to give everyone a better experience without having a lot of background noise. A little bit about who we are at the Motor Safety Association. We are a non-government, non-profit safety association in Saskatchewan. We work for basically any safety-related issues, such as we offer various workshops and training, shop inspections, noise level testings, ergonomic assessments, baseline audits, and core certification. So we basically work with any business with a motor or steering wheel in Saskatchewan. So I encourage you to check out our website. What's new for us is actually we're now on Twitter. We do have a Twitter handle here at the bottom of the screen, at Motor Safety SK. So give us a follow, and we do send out a lot of good safety-related tweets. So on the agenda for today's webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about an introduction as to the importance of fall arrest and fall protection. We're going to look at some fall injury stats, define fall protection and fall arrest. We're going to look at each of the specific safety legislation per province of CWEDA and show what the requirements are. Look at different fall protection devices that are available in the market. Let's talk a little bit about ladder safety and tie off anchor points. And as mentioned, we'll have a question and answer period at the end if there's questions. This topic poses a lot of challenges. Some of the challenges that we hear when we go into shops are, where am I supposed to tie off on this combine or tractor? There is no hook or there's no engineered tie-off points. And that's a problem. Manufacturers, right in the equipment design, should really incorporate an engineered anchor point where you can hook onto it so you can tie off to a safe engineered point. And we'll go through the webinar and you'll see why this is important, and to pose the question potentially to your manufacturer or OEM supplier why they do not have an engineered anchor point on the pieces of equipment. Sometimes we hear technicians say that we've been doing this job for 20 years and I haven't fallen yet, or it takes a lot of time to put all that fall harness arrest software or equipment on, and to utilize the equipment it takes time to gear up. So those are just some various challenges that we hear of, and I'm sure that you guys are exposed to in the dealerships. But we'll try and go through some different examples to give you some ideas of how to prepare and to utilize fall protection in your business. Because really when we look at it, anybody can fall. Superman fell. Looking at someone like Christopher Reeve, Superman falling off of a horse during a riding accident, was paralyzed and had to use a respirator in order to breathe. So falls are very real. They don't have to be from a large height. Falling from a smaller or a shorter height could cause a serious injury depending how you land. So we're going to look at different scenarios and examples, because anyone in fact can be affected by a fall. When we look at the statistics, and I took a sampling in the province of Saskatchewan, this is the last 4 years for all of the farm equipment dealerships within Saskatchewan. And on the left-hand column are the part of bodies that are injured, and these are all due to a fall. So a fall and an injury to the arm, a fall and a back injury, a fall and a chest injury. So we look at the column on the left with the parts of the body that have sustained an injury, the number of claims in the last 4 years, and the WCB costs per claim. So when we tally those numbers up, we're looking at just over $580,000 in WCB costs for fall claims. So your WCB costs would make up the wage replacement that WCB pays injured workers, as well as the medical healthcare costs for treating that injured worker from a fall. But what's not on this graph is the indirect costs. When we look at a workplace injury, you can take the direct cost numbers and times those from anywhere from 5 to 50. Those would be your indirect costs, such as lost productivity, training, hiring, rework, those sorts of things. So on average, tallying total of these claims would really be between anywhere from $22,000 to $221,000 on average. So there is a lot of financial aspect involved when we look at the costs of a claim per fall within this industry. So I just wanted to showcase those numbers and give everyone a chance to look and see what has happened in the past as far as injuries for falls and the associated costs, and to have those numbers in mind. So what exactly is fall protection? A lot of times people may think of fall protection automatically means putting on a fall harness and tying off. And that's part of it, but that's not all of what it entails. That is just basically a component of fall protection. There are a lot of different things we can do before that point to minimize the risk of a fall. What about a control zone? Is there a way that we can control or have a barrier that limits the access of a person to an area where they could fall? That would be an example of a control zone. They could use a travel restraint system. They may have a lanyard that's a certain length, or a self-retracting lifeline that's a certain length that allows them to only travel a certain distance. And I'll speak to examples of lanyards and self-retracting lifelines later in the presentation and give you visual examples of those items. But with the travel restraint system, it basically limits, due to the length of your travel restraint, how far you can move from where you're anchored. So that's how that restrains you in a certain area. What about safety nets? We actually spoke with a business about a few weeks ago here, and they have an oil change pit or a lube bay, and they actually installed a safety net over top of that quick change lube pit area. And recently they had a customer that fell onto the safety net. So if that person wouldn't have fell onto that net, could have fallen right into the pit and sustained serious injury. So keep those things in mind. Certain aspects of fall protection have been proven to work, and if we can prevent that fall from occurring, it's our ultimate goal in this process. Then there's the examples of guardrails. So if you have a mezzanine level in your business, or we look on pieces of equipment, they have certain guardrails on them now to limit the potential of a fall. All different things that people can do to prevent falls from occurring. What about hole covers? Sometimes when we look at the whole fall protection concept, we're thinking that we're up on an elevated surface and we're going to be falling to ground level. But what if we're standing at ground level and we do have a large pit or a large hole? What kind of cover do we have in place to minimize people from falling into that? I was at a farm dealership in northern Saskatchewan. They had a beautiful lube pit system for changing oil and accessing the bottom of their equipment that they frequently go into. but it runs right through their shop, and they actually have a path, so when people go through to get outside, they all have to walk over this pit to get to access in and out. So we looked at different ways of using a barrier and saying, well, yes, it is a few further steps to go around it, but in the event of preventing a fall, that seems to make the most ideal sense. So they put a system in place to eliminate people from walking over their pit unnecessarily. And then there's the fall arrest system, and that pertains to wearing a complete body fall protection harness with the shock-absorbing lanyard, which we will give you some visual examples of as well. So when we look at fall protection, there is a lot of components to it, so it's not just as simple as tying off and wearing a harness. There's a lot of things we can do to mitigate that risk. And other examples, when we look at a hierarchy of fall protection, is how can we eliminate or engineer out that risk from occurring when we have the potentials of a fall? When we look at medieval times, when they were to light the chandelier, they didn't climb a ladder up every time to light the candles. This chandelier was on a rope and pulley, and they lowered it to ground level. So that was something that they could do to prevent a fall from occurring. Another thing we've seen done a lot in dealerships are this here's middle picture where they use a grease zerk that are mounted in a lube bank. So basically the grease lines are mounted and relocated, so you have an access grease point where you can lubricate your equipment without having to climb up into those hard to reach areas, maybe to grease it or lubricate an inner sheave. By utilizing these sort of systems, we've eliminated the potential of a fall for lubricating our equipment. Or what about even detailing our equipment? If we have a short squeegee and we're up on a platform, or if we have a squeegee with a long handle and we're working from ground level. All different things that we can do to prevent a fall. I even look at Christmas lights. You see a lot of people now who have instead of their Christmas lights on their eavesdrops, they may be on their deck rails, or they have yard inflated Christmas displays. So different people or different concepts in preventing falls from occurring. And I just challenge every one of us to think about that in our dealership. What are ways that we can eliminate or engineer out the risk of a fall from occurring? Another option is, if we can't engineer or eliminate it, is a guardrail or barrier. So we need to get on top of this air drill cart. So we can't eliminate that. We have to open the lids to put our seed and fertilizer into here. So how can we make it safer? Manufacturers have now a staircase that lowers and we can access this. There's a guardrail or barrier on the top. Makes it a whole lot safer. I remember when the first air carts came out, there was a little ladder on the back of them, but keep in mind they were only just over 100 bushels, and these ones are a lot higher than what the old ones were. So it's nice to see the manufacturers using guardrails or barriers, different concepts to access equipment safer. I've even noticed different tractor manufacturers, they've added step kits on certain series tractors to make them a lot more easier to access than what they were originally designed with. They have a nice rail and a step that's lower to the ground. So those sort of things really help in this process. This is an example of fall protection using a lanyard and a harness. So when we look at our different systems of fall protection, this would fall under a travel restraint system. So this person is wearing a fall protection harness, and they've tied the lanyard around this piece of equipment they're working on. So it's basically limiting their access. So they are working in this area. So if they were to fall, they're going to basically fall as the distance of what their lanyard would allow them to fall. So this is an example of restraining a person in a position that they're going to be limited to a fall as much as what the length of their lanyard indicates. So those were examples of fall protection, but what exactly is fall arrest? Well, fall arrest is a system that permits a limited free fall which results in the stopping and suspending of a worker. A fall arrest system is designed to absorb the impact forces of a fall in progress and stop the worker before he or she hits the ground. This requires the worker to wear a harness with a lanyard with a shock-absorbing device and attach it to an anchorage point. So when we look at fall arrest, it's a lot, the process is a little different than fall protection. When we look at fall arrest, this person is wearing a fall harness and they have a lanyard with a shock absorber on the back of it. Keep in mind, not all fall protection harnesses are the same. One size does not fit all. You can't just have one harness and expect everyone to wear it unless they're all exactly the same size. There are different sizes of harnesses, and they must be fitted for the worker that uses the harness. I'm going to talk a bit about on the back here, this shock absorber pack, just have a better picture of it. So this absorber hooks on the D-ring on the back of your harness, and that's what it looks like before it is utilized. So if the person was involved in a fall, that shock absorber is going to open and absorb that fall. So that's basically the concept of the shock absorber. A little different than the shock absorbers that we may be used to when we think of in an automotive or industrial application. This is what's used on the fall harness. But what gets interesting is when we're involved with fall arrest, we have to plan the process out and calculate so that we are using the correct rigging for the application. And I've got this diagram. So if I'm a worker and I have a 6-foot lanyard and my shock absorber, when it opens, it expands 3.5 feet to absorb that shock, plus the height of my worker, which is 6 feet, taking into consideration a 2-foot buffer zone or safety factor, I need 17.5 feet of clearance for this fall arrest equipment to work properly. And that's a bit of a concern. When we look at, say, if we were working on top of a combine, we don't have 17.5 feet. They're not that tall. So if we were to put on a harness with a shock-absorbing lanyard and were to fall, and based on these calculations, we would hit the ground before it worked properly. So in certain applications, you may have to use a roller staircase, a scaffold, or a self-retracting lifeline, or a lanyard with a distance that can't be used. Or either that, if we have an engineered anchorage point that allows for that distance of fall. So these are different things to think about. It's not just as simple as putting on a harness with a shock absorber and protecting ourselves. We have to be aware of the calculation for where we could fall. Also, we have to be aware of the pendulum effect. If this worker was working directly below where he or she is anchored, they would fall straight below. However, but if they're off to the side of their anchorage point and they were to incur a fall, they could swing into another surface. And this could be critical. In fact, you could sustain more injury from the contact of swinging opposed to actually falling. So just to keep that in mind, when you do anchor, be sure that you anchor and work directly below your anchor point. These are examples of a relief step. So on your fall harness, when that's in place, and say if you were to fall, these relief straps, they basically pull out, and they're like stirrups. So you would put your feet into the relief steps, and this allows you to reposition, to take some of the weight off the worker's body, and it allows the movement to change position, and that helps with the blood flow to avoid suspension trauma. So those are things to consider when we look at these fall harnesses, that they have the relief steps, and importantly, people know how to use them. Hence the importance of this slide when it comes to training. We can have the equipment in place, but people need to know how to use it properly and to maintain it. Are they pre-inspecting the equipment before they use it to ensure it's safe or not damaged? Have they taken a training course? Are they competent on how to calculate what kind of distance they need for clearance when it comes to a fall arrest scenario? And sometimes the suppliers that sell this equipment, they do offer training as well, or they sometimes can direct you to training when it comes pertinent to fall protection and fall arrest. And do they know what to do in the event of a rescue? Do they know how to use the stirrups or the relief steps? So keep that in mind. We need to train people on the equipment, and we can't put them out there and expect them to use it without having an understanding of how to use it safely due to proper training. Such as rescue, if the person wasn't involved and they were hurt or they're hanging from their fall arrest harness, we need to understand what to do in the event of a rescue. And a lot of times this actually involves calling 911 prior to the incident, or working with your emergency response in your community or jurisdiction. Because what if we have a worker that's suspended at a height of 30 feet and we don't have a ladder or a means of rescuing that worker? So therefore, communicating these sorts of scenarios to 911 ahead of time, or to your emergency response first responders in your community or area or within your business, is critical in understanding what the rescue plans are. You need to communicate and write these plans and post them. People have to understand them before the work begins, because you really have a very limited window of time. If a worker was involved in a fall, there's approximately a 30-minute window, so we need a very prompt rescue. Because what happens is the blood pools in the body, and the harness holds that blood. And when the person is eventually rescued, you want to set the person in a chair and leave the harness on and let that blood slowly return to their upper extremities. We don't want to lay them on their back and lift their feet, because we could have some serious concerns. Therefore, it's so critical to have an effective rescue plan in place prior to an incident that could occur. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the legislation for each of the provinces within CUIDA, and to show what regulations there are for each province. British Columbia, we'll start with, the obligation to use fall protection. Unless otherwise provided for in the regulation, an employer must ensure that a fall protection system is used when work is being done at a place from which a fall of 3 meters or more may occur, or where a fall from a height of less than 3 meters. And this involves the risk of injury greater than the risk of injury from the impact on a flat surface. So British Columbia is using the 3 meters as a guideline for their legislation. Their neighbors in Alberta, what their regulation states, employers are to ensure that workers use a fall protection system under these conditions: if a worker could fall 3 meters or more, or if a worker could fall less than 3 meters, and there is an unusual possibility of injury, and that could be defined as an injury to the potential for a worker to sustain injury more serious than those likely to result from landing on a solid or flat surface. So again, Alberta and BC very similar regulations. In Saskatchewan, an employer or contractor shall ensure that workers use a fall protection system at a temporary or permanent work area. So I'm going to stop right there. A temporary, that could be a combine or a tractor. Okay? So a worker may fall 3 meters or more, or there's a possibility of injury if a worker falls less than 3 meters. So we're looking at the same 3 meters here for temporary or permanent. But then it goes on to state, an employer or contractor shall ensure that a worker at a permanent work area is protected from falling by a guardrail or similar barrier if the worker may fall a vertical distance of more than 1.2 meters and less than 3 meters. So that's a little bit interesting when we look at, okay, what an example that I can use is a permanent work area that's more than 1.2 meters and less than 3 meters is a loading dock. every dealership has one. Is there a guardrail or barrier in place? If not, there should be. You may recall last year I did a couple webinars in Saskatchewan about ticketing from OHS when it comes to falls. That system is still a go, July 1st, 2014, and these regulations that I just stated on this slide are covered off in the event of a falls for fall protection. So just to keep that in mind if you're in Saskatchewan for the possibility of ticketing for fall infractions. Manitoba's legislation applies to every workplace where there's a risk of a worker falling a vertical distance of 3 meters or more, a vertical distance of less than 3 meters, where there's an increased risk of injury due to the surface or item in which the worker might land, or into operating machinery or moving parts of the machinery. So they talk about machinery in their regulation, and again they use that 3-meter guideline that we've seen listed in the other provinces. So as you can see, the provinces within CUITA, they do have specific legislation around fall protection. So what can we do to protect ourselves? What are some devices out there on the market? And I want to just mention the next few slides. The Motor Safety Association does not promote or endorse any of these examples. They are merely that, just examples or samples for you to look at. Some of them are from Australia or the United Kingdom. We've researched what people are doing within this industry across the world to give you examples or ideas that you may be able to utilize in your dealership. So keep in mind if you do utilize anything, just to ensure that it meets the CSA standard or your provincial regulations. This is a basic example of a self-retracting lifeline that I spoke of earlier in the presentation, and this hooks onto an anchorage point, and this basically limits how much you can move. You can move out slowly the distance of the lifeline as far as the length of the cable inside of it, so it'll allow you to move. However, if you were to fall, it acts like a seatbelt brake, and that kicks in, and that permits you to falling. It says within 2 feet that's going to kick in, the self-retracting lifeline. So in addition to that, they've made these self-retracting lifelines with the shock absorber on them. So that's going to be much the same as the previous example. Again, it hooks onto an engineered anchor point, hooks onto your harness, but now we have to be aware of the distance of the shock absorber if we were to incur a fall. So some education and training is involved when we are using the correct fall protection equipment for the job. This is an example of a twin turbo lifeline. And how this works is it's basically 2 retracting lifeline harnesses mounting to your D hook on the back of your harness, or I should say 2 retracting lifelines, and you're able to snap the hook onto an engineered anchor point, and it allows you some mobility, and it supports your weight so you can access the work area, and you can release one hook and hook it to the next point and move your hooks forward as you work around the piece of equipment. So that's how a twin turbo lifeline works. I've heard some good feedback on it. They are a bit less restrictive and allows for a little more freedom of movement. This here device it's basically an adjustable freestanding system that you can use as an engineered tie-off point. It's aluminum, so it's very lightweight. It's adjustable in height, up to 36 feet in height, so you got a lot of distance of height you can work with. Easy to move around. You can tow it, push it, use a forklift, and with that you can move with this horizontal rail, your point is going to slide, so you're going to always be directly under your tie-off point. And with that, I have a couple of pictures of it in use. This is one picture, and here's another one of it in use outside of a business. So it allows you to utilize it, and you have that horizontal rail. So that's one example that we've seen in place. This is very much the exact same example, except this is mounted on a trailer. So if you're on a service call or if you need to access a mobile location, you can utilize a device like this. You can basically unhook your trailer and have this available to utilize in the situation that you are away from your business. Here's an example of a crane basket. So if we have a service truck with a mobile crane on it, we can hook on this here fall arrest crane basket. And this allows you to access equipment safely. We can lift in right to the area we need to utilize it with. And it's great for mobile, for on service calls. It stores right on the hitch receiver of your truck, and it allows you to access that piece of equipment when you're trying to get into an area of height. Again, you're going to want to wear your fall protection harness whenever you're in an elevated basket or device, but this is another great option for people, again, on mobile or for service call applications. This is another device that's been utilized for mobile uses. You can tow it behind your vehicle, and this gives you an engineered tie-off point as well. It's basically a trailer style, a fall protection system. You can back it into the area you need to utilize, and you can use it accordingly. But I do advise anytime in a mobile situation, be sure that you have a second person available, just in the event of rescue, that you are able to rescue that person. If this person's on a service call and he falls off the ladder and is suspended by this device, he needs to be rescued promptly as well. So just keep that in mind anytime you do send people out on the road for these scenarios. Again, here's another example of a hitch-mounted fall protection system. So this mounts right onto the receiver of your truck, to the hitch receiver. It's got drop-down jacks, and this one elevates up to 22 feet in height. And this again gives you an anchorage point that you can utilize to tie off on in the event of for fall protection. So there are many different versatile examples, big and small, that can work, and very mobile too, I might add. As you can see, this one folds up when it's not in use, so it doesn't take up a lot of space. This here device is called the Lift Pod, and I personally feel that every dealership should have one of these. This is a handy device. It's very lightweight, it's narrow, you can wheel it through doorways, and you can wheel it right up into an area you need to get to, and it elevates up to 14 feet, which is the typical height of some of the larger equipment that we see at farm equipment dealerships. And it's very handy and lightweight, so you can get into most areas with it. So again, that's a nice little device. People have actually taken these on service calls in certain applications. So just a lot of different products out there on the market one can look at. This one we commonly see at a lot of dealerships. This is basically a forklift mounted lifting device. So this is a man basket that goes on the front of your forklift. Keep in mind, you just can't put any man basket on the front of your forklift. It needs to be CSA or engineer approved when we're utilizing those sort of devices. As well as the forklift operator must be a competent operator and present at the controls at all time. We just can't elevate somebody in the work platform and leave or transport them in an elevated position. So there is some things we need to be aware of when we are utilizing these devices. Just be sure to check with the appropriate legislation for your province when you do utilize this sort of equipment. This is an example of a scissor lift device or an aerial work platform, and we see these commonly used as well. And they're handy. You can drive them around and elevate them to the height that you need, but they do get tippy as well, and you want to ensure that the operator is lowered when they are moving them around and that they have their fall protection harness on, because what's happened is if you drive this and it is elevated and they hit a hole or a dip, that person will launch right out of that basket. So that's why they need to be anchored with their fall arrest or fall protection harness when they are utilizing these sort of devices. Here's another example of an anchor point that you can utilize within your business. And this one here again goes up to 22 feet, and it's very compact. It folds down very nicely. It allows you to drive it in. It works similar to a cherry picker, and it even looks like a cherry picker. You can roll it into the area that you need to utilize. But what's neat about this one is it has a self-rescuing feature built into it where the hydraulics are, you release the hydraulic pressure and there's a check valve that slowly lets the pressure down, which brings the device down. So this one has that built-in feature into it. And again, this one's very compact. You can store this in your shop, and it's mobile if you need to take it from one corner of your shop to the other. And if you don't want to be limited to having an anchor point in one specific area of your shop, certain devices like this are really helpful in that regards because you can move them to wherever you need to. And I know storage is always an issue in dealerships, and with a device like this that folds up and you can basically store it in a lot of places without taking up a lot of space. This here device is a counterweight jib fall arrest system, and this has a counterweight at the bottom which can actually be lifted by a forklift from all sides or by a crane. There's lifting hooks on it, so you can use a crane to move it around. Again, this one too, it allows you to take it where you need the fall arrest system in place, so you can pick it up, put it where you need it. It rotates 360 degrees, and it has a horizontal rail to ensure that you're always under, to avoid a pendulum swing. So again, this is a great device that's very versatile, indoor or outdoor, 360 degrees, which can be utilized in any shop. This one's an overhead trolley beam, and this allows for horizontal movement within a business. But when you do have a system like this that's mounted, just to be sure that you're watching for overhead cranes. And I always like the beauty of these systems. By being directly under the area of your anchor point, you're going to avoid that pendulum effect. And this is going to give you some movement as well if you're working on different sorts of equipment in your business. But what about our tools? If I'm working at a height, I don't want to drop a hammer or my drill or a channel lock on somebody, so there are different tethers that you can utilize to ensure that your tools don't fall down below as well. So there's all kinds of different gadgets on the market that can assist in preventing injuries from falls. I'm going to touch a little bit on extension ladder safety. And anytime you go to use an extension ladder, inspect it before you use it. Check if there are any loose, broken, or bent parts. I also like to check the capacity decal on the inside of the ladder to ensure that the user of the ladder is within that capacity limit. And the rubber legs on the bottom of the ladder, that they're not in place or missing either. Ensure your ladder rests against a firm structure and it extends at least 1 meter above that contact point where it's resting. And utilizing the 4-to-1 vertical slope. So for every 4 feet the ladder is up, we need to be out 1 foot at the base. And you want to ensure that you have your ladder tied or secured to prevent it from slipping. And to ensure too that your ladder is CSA approved, it's not home built either. So keep that in mind. It's just the basic information when it comes to ladder safety, because you could fall from a ladder just as well as anything within a business. For businesses that have permanent mounted ladders, this is it's called a ladder climbing system. So if you have a permanent horizontal ladder, this actually has a brake on it, and as you climb, it slides with you up or down. But if you were to fall, the brake would activate. So this is ideal for ladders that are permanently mounted. These are ladder hook extensions. So if I'm climbing a ladder, I would have the small hooks onto my fall harness, and then each of the large hooks, I would snap it into each rung as I climbed. So I would release, snap, as I climbed the ladder, therefore always ensuring that I'm connected with the ladder, and ensuring that we use a three-point contact when we're utilizing ladders as well. These ladder hook extensions work very well if we are climbing or descending from ladders. Have we seen anything like this in our dealership? We have a vertical access ladder door on the side of our roof, or side of our building to access our roof. You should have some sort of a door or a device to basically lock this out from somebody climbing up there. That's a way of limiting a fall from occurring. We've engineered that by putting a door on the front of this ladder to ensure that only people who need to be up there have the key to that lock, which can access it. And it probably is a good idea for liability to have that covered at your dealership as well. So with a lot of these examples we showcased, I just want you to really think about that and how we can make those work at our dealership, or if there's any changes or modifications that we could do to prevent a fall from occurring. These are very handy as well. Rolling ladders or rolling staircases. Sometimes people may work from a step ladder or an extension ladder, so they're up on this ladder and they're trying to conduct their work on that piece of equipment. They're trying to change a belt or something, and that's really dangerous. There are different pieces of equipment that you can use for the job, such as these rolling ladders, and I'd recommend they're great in the parts department as well as the service department within the business. Very useful. You can get different heights, different widths, so there are a lot of possibilities and options in the market that people can utilize. Scaffolding. Scaffolding is a temporary structure, and you want to be aware of the capacity of your scaffolding. Again, you want to inspect it pre-use to ensure structurally it's not cracked, the planks are in good shape, and to check your provincial regulations, because some of them have different rules regarding scaffolding. You want to ensure that the scaffolding is engineered again, it's not home built. And I know in Saskatchewan the regulation states where work cannot be safely done from the ground or from a permanent structure, an employer shall provide a scaffold. So right in this provincial act and regulations, it speaks to the use of scaffolding in Saskatchewan. So again, I encourage you to check your local provincial regulations when it comes to scaffolding rules and requirements if you choose to use them in your dealerships. I'm going to wrap up this presentation with a few slides on anchor points. And we've looked at different devices that we can use, mobile devices, different systems. But what about different anchor points right in our shop that we can utilize? If you have overhead concrete in your business, which I haven't seen quite commonly, this is just an example of a concrete anchor that basically goes into the concrete, and it serves as an engineered anchor point, and it'll hold up to 5,000 pounds. What I've more commonly seen in farm equipment dealerships are exposed I-beams or H-beams on their structure of the building. If you have exposed beams, this would be probably a better option for you. This is an I-beam anchor, and it clamps around the beam and it secures in place. Therefore, when you have something like this, you would have an engineered anchor point in place. So this is a great device, and I could see every farm equipment dealership that has an I-beam or a frame in their business utilize something like this because this would be very easy to mount, and it would serve the purpose of what you needed to. This device is called a cross-arm anchor. Again, this is another form of a device that you can use as an engineered anchor point. And what it is, it's basically a strap where one hole is smaller than the other, and you can wrap it around your engineered point. It has to be an engineered safe point to hook it onto. So you can wrap that on so it's the length that you want, and then you can tie it off onto there. You can put your lanyard or your self-retracting lifeline. You can hook right onto this device. So this is great. Say if we have a piece of equipment that there may not be a hook or something we could hook onto per se, but if there's a frame or a handle or something that's the engineer deemed structurally safe, we could utilize a strap like this to use as an engineered anchor point. Keep in mind we can't use a ratchet strap or a sling for this device. It needs to be a cross-arm anchor strap as it is engineered for this application. And again, this is another device. This one's called a permanent anchor. So you would mount this into a surface that an engineer deems safe. You wouldn't put this into a 2x4. It would be into a beam that an engineer deemed this safe to anchor as an anchor point. So this swivels, but it's approved for a single user at a time. So you can use one person can access this here device. So again, if you have a spot that you want to utilize, you can mount permanent anchors like these within your business. This here is an example of an overhead crane used as an anchor point. However, an overhead crane wasn't designed to be a tie-off or engineered anchor point. However, in certain applications, it could be used as an anchor point if you are in fact following the correct procedure with it. You're going to want to ensure you have a lockout tagout procedure on the crane, that no other cranes are going to be utilized that could affect this area. And my problem with this is, what if people don't follow that procedure and they use the remote to lift or lower themselves? So again, this isn't recommended. This has been utilized, or some people have spoke of using this as an example of an engineered anchor point because it does have a capacity in place. But more so, the previous examples we spoke of would in fact be a lot better of a device that you could utilize opposed to your overhead crane within your business. And this last example, I want us to think about this. This is basically a multi-purpose roof anchor primarily used in construction, where they would nail this to the surface of a roof. But when I look at this, I see an opportunity, and I ask, why isn't something like this right on the cab roof of a piece of equipment? Why doesn't the manufacturer or OEM build an engineered point, something like this, that swivels, that's elevated on the top of our roof, that we can use for a tie-off point? We've seen the regulations, we know it's required, and I just think it would make everyone's jobs a lot easier if the pieces of equipment came directly with this a sort of an engineered anchor point to make those a lot safer for us to use. So keep that in mind. If you're ever talking to your OEM or manufacturers, you could pose the question why they don't have an engineered anchor point on the pieces of equipment. This concludes our presentation on fall protection and fall arrest. And I'm hoping one of the goals of this presentation is that you guys got a lot of information out of it, because sometimes some of these devices that we've showcased you may be able to use in your dealership, and different ways of preventing a fall. Maybe a barrier or a guardrail we're going to be looking at as a means of preventing that fall, or a hole cover. So it doesn't just mean we're protecting ourselves from falls that occur by wearing protection. We look at the hierarchy, different ways we can control the possibility of a fall. So I want you guys to take that out of this webinar as well. As always, feel free to call us anytime if you do have questions. We have a website. We're on Twitter. And our next webinar will be July 15th, 2014 on training requirements. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to unmute the attendees, and everyone will have a chance to ask any questions if they have any questions or comments that they want to pose at this time. So if there are any questions, I'll be on the line here for some time, and I said we're always available for contact as well.